Welcome to Sports Performance Radio. I am your host, B.Chavez, and as always, I'd very much like to thank each and every one of you for tuning in and listening yet again this month. This show is, as many of you have already pointed out before it's even posted, is a day or two late. For that, I do apologize. That reflects nothing other than the fact that I am very, very busy, and business is good, and I thank everyone for that. However, it just makes a little difficult to do some of these extraneous and not to devalue the show, but some of these freebie type things. I don't make anything from this radio show, other than, of course, it is advertising and connects me to people and potential clients. So, but other than that, I don't sell ads. I don't generate a revenue through this show. So, at times it is my lesser priority, although I really do love it and I enjoy interacting with all of you. So, I apologize for the slight delay, and I will try to minimize that in the future. Also, in the apologetic tone, many of you have pointed out that the quality, the audio quality, the recording quality is oftentimes not very good. And sadly, this show will do nothing to enhance that opinion. This show, the actual recording was bad enough that I had considered shelving it entirely. But the material is just so good, and the people which I was speaking to were so good, and I'll introduce that in a moment. I just really felt compelled to spend a little extra time, try and clean up the audio with filters and editing methods, and try and bring it to you. And I have done that, and as kind of bad as this is, it's measurably better than the original recording. So I apologize for the quality, but I don't apologize for my success in improving it. So all of that said, all of that behind me, no real preamble with this show. I really have nothing to talk about current event-wise or any of that. I will address that in the extra show coming on the 15th of the month. There are a few things out there, but nothing that needs to be covered here. So really, we're just on to the guest. So today's guest, and part of the reason for the poor audio quality is because it is guests, plural. We have two, and we did it via kind of a party line arrangement, and that caused a little degradation in the audio. But our guests were kind of a duo, kind of a tag team, kind of a, bad pun, but kind of a master blaster scenario that culminated in a win at the Junior World's Strongest Man. Some of you may not even know that there is such a thing, but there is Junior World's Strongest Man. Junior referring to the age as in under, it's either 23 or 24. I probably should have researched that first. But nonetheless, it is junior in terms of age. It's kind of a collegiate age bracket for a World's Strongest Man contest. And the winner won the heavyweights in the Junior World's Strongest Man. And that person is Nick Hadge. Nick is very, very well known, very popular East Coast strongman. He's very exceptional in every way. And the other half of the guest pairing today is someone who's been with us a few times before, and that's Andrew Triana. And Nick and Andrew are kind of lifelong friends. They've been training partners for a very long time, and they're both very good athletes in their own right. But in terms of paths taken, Nick has taken more of a hands-on athletic approach. Not that he is not educated in the ways of strength and all of that. He certainly is, but he's taken kind of more of a hands-on competitive approach. And Andrew, who is also a good athlete and very competitive and probably will win some national and world titles along the way, but he has definitely taken much more of an intellectual approach. And so together, being such good friends, being so well acquainted, having such high access to one another, you have this really, really high intellectual acumen and this really, really high work capability and hands-on acumen, and together, almost as one beast, they have created just essentially a factory for effective strongman. And as I said, it culminated in a win at the WSM, which is essentially about as good as it gets. So knowing how well they work together, knowing how really brilliant and intricate Andrew's training programs and methodologies are, I just really thought it would be interesting to bring them to you together in kind of a, this is how we did it, this is how we communicate. So you're going to get a lot of information in this interview. My suggestion is don't necessarily listen to the information as, oh, I'm gonna run and do that. I'm gonna start doing that particular drill. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. Although you could take that away, my real suggestion is try and absorb how well these people work together and try and absorb the method and style of feedback from one to the other. One says or does this, the other digests it and makes these adjustments. And usually it's not adjustments on the fly, as they'll talk about. It's more of adjustments for the next round of training. So it's watch what happens now, make notes, don't deviate, live up to the program. But I've gathered all this information, so now I'm going to change the program slightly so it'll be better next time. And also, in the background, Andrew's going to really hammer the concept of just kind of not just developing work capacity, not just developing strength, not just developing coordination, not just developing technique in the individual events, but also developing the ability to just be mean, to work when you don't necessarily want to work under fatigue, to plow through the barriers that hold other people back. And Andrew is very much of the opinion that that is a trainable trait, a learnable skill. I happen to agree with him, and I think he does a really good job of explaining how he coached Nick into doing that, into being that person, which again ultimately culminated in a win. So I really think that's what you should listen for here. If you want to kind of digest the training ideas, I strongly suggest you go back and listen to some of the earlier interviews with Andrew, where he really talks about these training concepts in more specifics, which will then elucidate why it's going on in this, WSM preparatory type training, because just to hear it, it just sounds maybe a little random, maybe a little, wow, I don't know why that's happening. But if you go back and listen to him talk about, alactic training and, aerobic capacity and all of these things, then you can begin to see the pattern that is the madness that is, Andrew's training style and something that I really think everyone could benefit from, but I really believe you need a much broader background to really absorb it. But here I think you can really get the interpersonal dynamic of how two people could and should communicate to create one machine that does nothing but train and win. So with no more from me, we'll break away. We'll run a few of a little EvilGenius sports performance ads and some of the silliness that I stick between. And when we come back, we will be on the phone with the two-headed monster that is Nick Hadge and Andrew Triana that culminated in a win at Junior WSM.
This is Sports Performance Radio. Don't forget to sign up for the SPR and EvilGenius Sports Performance newsletter via the Team EvilGSP website.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, here we are with another awesome strongman interview. This one's going to be really exciting, interesting, and different, and both different and difficult, because what we have on the line is athlete and coach. And hopefully we're going to be able to bring to you a little bit of real-life knowledge on how the interaction between athlete and coach does work and really, really should work. So what we've got is our good friend Andrew Triana, who's been with Sports Performance Radio in the past, done a number of really, really great high-end science depth interviews and talks. And we have with him Nick Hadge, who is, if you don't know, I'll let him introduce himself and his accolades, but super high caliber strongman. And the two of them work together to create long-term periodized programming to excel at the sport of strongman. So what we're hoping to do is show you how that synergy comes together and what real programming should look like. So, guys, are you there?
Yep, glad to be back.
So before we get too far, most of our listeners know Andrew. So, Mr. Hadge, go ahead and tell us who you are, what you've done, and, just kind of give us a little quick background. I know you've had quite the competitive years, so go ahead and throw that out there so we got a kind of a bedrock from which to start.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've been competing as strongman for about 5 or 6 years now. I won teenage nationals back in 2013, and I've been competing in the middleweight 231 for a long time, and then I went up to heavyweight in the past few years, and I've been competing in the open heavyweights and then the junior division this year.
So today, we're going to talk about a few different trainable behaviors as well as the actual training program. So to begin, I just want to introduce grit. It comes from a psychology background, and it's a positive, non-cognitive trait based on an individual's passion for a particular long-term goal or end state. And it's coupled with powerful motivation to achieve that respective objective. So being that it's non-cognitive, I want to pose the question, is this behavior a trainable trait? Is it something that training can impose a stress that causes a grit adaptation in the mindset of the athlete? So I just want you guys to bear that in mind the whole time as we talk about the training and the weird encounters Nick really had through training as things changed last minute based on what country it was in or the events. So Nick's going to take that.
Yeah, so USS Nationals was an awesome time. I just barely made it with that, and then there wasn't too much information released between like then and what exactly that meant by winning that. I knew I was invited to another show, but there was really no specification. It was set to be a junior world championship, but I didn't really hear anything other than that. And then a week later, there was news that the Masters is going to be held in Ireland in like about a month, and there's potential that that's going to be where my show is as well. And I got the news on that, and they were like, hey, this might be your show in Ireland, and this might be the events list. And upon the events list, I mean, it was max log I thought I had to do, so I was training for like a 1-rep max log and a few other specific things, but yeah, I got kind of twisted, and then I found out it wasn't that, and it was going to actually be like 2 months later instead in September. The events list is going to be completely different, so kind of, I wasn't really sure what the events were, and it was tough really not training unspecific, not really knowing where to take the training from there, so it was tough.
And you found out the events were 4 weeks out?
I think it was 5 weeks.
Okay. So
for the World Championship, you actually only got the events truly hammered out 5 weeks before the actual date of the event?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and honestly, to me that's crazy because over, like, in America at least, you know the events long before then, but when I actually got to the show and talked to the other competitors, they said that it was a common thing for, like, the overseas competitions, and that some people don't even know the events 2 weeks out, and I thought that was crazy. So along the journey from a transition between like national to international, that was definitely one thing I've learned is you kind of just have to be ready for anything because you don't really you might not know the events until 2 weeks out. So I feel like they put a lot of stress into what exactly the events were going to be, and I like almost stressed too much about it when you gotta just kind of be ready for anything in the sport, so that's what I learned from that.
Well, I certainly have a deep sympathy for you because as you said, the macabre, the normal standard of a North American athlete is lots of preparation and specificity. But something that my old colleague in radio, Mike Johnston, always pointed out is the original concept, and I know this isn't what you're born into, but us old guys, the original concept of strongman was rather kind of that surprise, holistic, we might test your strength any damn well we please kind of attitude. And I'm smiling because I'm kind of like, yeah, that's real strongman to me. And I know that's not where, your mindset is, certainly not with a, money event like a national champion or a world championship, but it's still pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's completely different. Like I said, in the international, those guys don't know for 2 weeks out, and they're competing also. Like, some of them, one of my roommates from the Netherlands said he competes like once a month sometimes for like more than half a year. So those guys are competing all the time. Like, it's ridiculous.
So Nick's lack of event knowledge and the surprise of what the event list was when we actually found out was almost as stressful to me as a coach. Because Like you said, being American athletes, neither of us have ever been exposed to the thought of a 3-day contest, much less only having one press over the 3 days and there being 8 events. So that definitely posed a new aspect of programming for me to deal with. So before we get into the very specific prep, I'm going to talk about the 2-week alarm phase Nick had to begin his final mesocycle. So that was transitioning out of an aerobic phase, hypertrophy phase after nationals, and then a haphazard 2-week peak phase. Like you said, we weren't sure about Ireland being 4 weeks away. So basically, that was a haphazard peak phase that led to a transition that led to this 7-week mesocycle. So my goal for the first 2 weeks of training were to spike his aerobic capacity further because training had been muddled last month, increase unilateral proficiency, triplanar force production, and fill in the gaps as far as weaknesses in his strongman game goes. So like you said, it was random. So the way I did this was actually almost exactly in the order I read. So his very first movement prep exercise, I would call them, for each day was a medley. So I'll read off the one he highlighted, and I did as well as one of the most important parts of his first 2-week alarm phase. So it was called unilateral fight club. So one repetition was denoted as a 100-foot prowler push with no weight, single leg squat, which was denoted as a 4-inch deficit in which he would step off the box, controlling himself eccentrically to the floor with his other leg, and using predominantly his medial arch and adductor to pull himself back up to the box from that 4-inch deficit. Next was another 50-foot prowler push. Repeat the same squat protocol. That was 3 reps on each leg as I described. Another 50-foot prowler push. And one top-down Turkish get up each side. So that's just starting standing and eccentrically controlling yourself to the floor. So like I said, that was 1 rep, and that included 200 feet of empty prowler pushes, 6 single-leg squats in eccentric tempo on each side, and 1 top-down Turkish get up on each side. And in each first week, he performed this twice for 2 sets of 4 reps. So that's quite a specific amount of volume to hit him with, especially only using 2 movements. But the reason I chose these 2 movements was because I've been training with Nick for 4 years. So as far as coaching goes, I had the best possible assessment I can make of the athlete, including his lifestyle. So that also played into how I programmed his resistance training. Because USS Nationals ended our college career, essentially 2 weeks after graduation. We competed. Nick started a new job, which included more weight hours, I believe it was 6, increased general life stress, physical activity outside of training. So he was doing a lot of personal training and a lot of movement for a large number of hours. Environmental stress due to driving through Boston. I think you said he was commuting 3 hours each week, was it? Or 3 hours each day?
Something like that, yeah, because between the gym, home, work, yeah.
So that also posed a small problem in the program. So the reason I gave him so much volume for his first movement prep exercise was to honestly primarily eliminate any preliminary stress he was bringing into the session with him due to life and like what I mentioned prior. Because what I've noted in athletes is a large amount of aerobic work with very minimal load, a high amount of volume and a small amount of time really gives a feeling of almost euphoria in that. And obviously, that is associated with enzymes and like anterior pathways. But it just acted as a buffer for him to be able to actually have a good foundation to start a training session on, versus coming in really sympathetic and in bad posture from personal training for 5-6 hours at a time. His next movement was like I said, unilateral proficiency, and this came in the form of a plyometric. So he had a unilateral broad jump into a bilateral broad jump. So unilateral each leg to potentiate the broad jump on the third jump.
So almost a triple jump scenario.
Excuse me?
Almost a triple jump scenario?
Essentially, it's the same, I guess you could say it's the same amount of work you would do with a triple jump, but essentially I'm splitting it up into a unilateral right, unilateral left, and then a bilateral.
So like a skipping triple jump.
Yes, yeah. So I guess you can call it triple jump.
My plyometric knowledge is very archaic, very old, and there was a lot of, anytime there was unilateral stuff, like Dr. Fred Hadfield and Charlie Francis and those people would refer to that as a skipping modality.
Actually, although I do say broad jump for the ease of the athlete to understand and for ease of communication, I would actually classify it as a hop. So,
okay.
I mean, if you want to get into Charlie Francis, hop just has a less connotation of what they said about skipping. But, no,
okay.
You're right. It is not a typical broad jump. It is, in fact, a hop.
Okay. I'm really more interested in the training model than the specifics, but whenever I hear something that I don't actually know, I get kind of excited. I'm like, oh, tell me about that. A lot of this whole radio interview thing is a little less for the public than you might think. A lot of it's just to pacify my own interests, and that would be a perfect example of it.
Well, I was trying to do a picture that Nick was doing what seemed like weird plyometric protocols in an effort to still build a total amount of force production produced via plyometrics for the set, but without really taxing them. Because like I said, a lot of stress, a lot of driving, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of changes in events. As a coach, I don't have that much stress to really play with right now, as I would like to keep in for a world's strongest man. So essentially, this 2-week alarm phase did its purpose. And I think Nick's going to talk about how he felt about the alarm phase and what led into week 3.
Yeah, the alarm phase, it was an alarm phase. It was really tough getting back into that kind of training, to be honest. Each session was incredibly difficult. I mean, I adapt kind of slowly to plyometrics especially. So week 1 was brutal for me. I could barely even finish each session. Week 2, I was kind of getting used to it a little bit more, kind of getting a little bit better flow down because, the unilateral play club, the power push to the squat, setting that up was kind of just like, although doing it efficiently at first. So once I really got the groove down and got to go through it, it was good in that sense. But yeah, the first few weeks really just, plyometrics were tough to get used to.
Now, just as a curiosity, because, again, the two of you work together so systematically and smoothly, some of the listeners may not necessarily have as much of the background as they could. Are you what's the word I'm looking? Do you have a high aptitude for force production plyometric stuff, or is that something that is problematic for you and this was extra challenging? I'm trying to just lay a foundation for, you say it was hard. I mean, was it hard in terms of, wow, that was just a butt pile of work and it was hard to do, or was it hard in that it's not something you're natively good at?
No, it is something I am natively good at. And that probably was why it was so hard, because, I was just really giving everything to it, and at first I tried to, I almost tried too hard, and there was so much volume where I almost got burnt out too quickly, and it was kind of like just adapting to that kind of training where it's going to be prolonged, just sets like that, prolonged numbers. I've never been exposed to that much volume, essentially.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about week 3. And week 3 was kind of when we were transitioning. He sent me an email with a set of rules. It was different than your standard weekly update from Andy, where it's here's your exercise, do this sets, do this reps. He said physical deload as needed, but work on the things that you feel like are your weaknesses within parameters I'll give you below. This is more of a mental hop before shit gets specific again. We've had a long and mentally taxing contest season, so...
I think Nick's neglecting to mention that our contest season actually started the December prior. So, Nick is on month 9 rather at this point of a straight periodized program with multiple peaks and nothing other than a transition week in between training. So at this point, it's been a long road.
Yeah, and this was our first, not first, but it was last, deload. before we really kicked into gear again. So it was kind of my last time to just my last deload. And the rules were just aerobic movement prep every time you train, correctives to end the session. It's speed log 1 day of the week. It's an eccentric only curls and leave the session feeling mentally clearer each day. I definitely think that's what I did for the aerobic movement prep every time. I kind of had fun. I wanted to stray away from the unilateral play club and all that stuff a little bit because it was just so taxing for me. So I kind of wanted to play around with my own thing. So I did one thing where I would just have a kettlebell, really light kettlebell, and it would just hit a few movements that I didn't feel were too fried or too overly worked on me. Whatever I could do, because there's so many variations. So I would pick 3 exercises and hit them for like all unilateral, where it's 12 each side, like 12 reps for as many rounds as possible. It would go about 1 minute and 30, 2 minutes of just straight work. So I did a lot of aerobic movement prep in that sense, and the eccentric only curls really helped a lot release tension in my elbows, and because I was going for a max log and that kind of thing, so it was a good rest for that. Yeah, then we found the events out, and it was like, okay, game time, this is what we gotta do. Strap down, and we got extremely specific, and you said do anything that you're just gonna be ready to can, drop, and then get specific, like don't overdo it, so that's what it is.
So that's going to lead us into the subject broader advice you hear about. This leaves me as a coach with weeks 4 through 7 of the 7-week mesocycle to work with. And my immediate thought is I have 3 days, 8 events, 6 of them which are really the same event, because they're all really heavy carries or deadlifts, and there's like 2 deadlifts. So it's essentially 6 of the same event over 3 days, 1 unilateral press out of the blue, and then a stone lifter. So my biggest programming moral for these last 3 weeks was just getting bang for my buck as far as, I guess you could say, points towards a good peak. So I'm going to talk about what I mean by that. There were 3 goals that I really defined as the essential adaptations Nick needed to make in order to be world's strongest. The first one I'm going to talk about, I call substrate flexibility. There's a lot of different terms for it, but essentially it's the ability to produce a high amount of force with your ATP-CP system, and then to recover aerobically, and then produce a similar or potentiated amount of force production again. This is extremely essential, obviously, in the fact that he's going to be competing 3 days in a row with 6 very similar events and 2 outlier events. So he needs the ability to do the same essential motor pattern with extreme amounts of force, because it was a very heavy contest. Rest, recover, and somehow be able to do it again. The second goal was generalized strength, and I put unilateral and bilateral. So like I said, most of the contest had a moving portion of it, and that moving portion was very heavy. And since 6 of the events were so similar, I was able to generalize it to one basic motor pattern that in strongman obviously is going to be a hip hinge style, whether it be on 1 or 2 legs. So I coined the second goal as generalized strength on 1 and 2 legs. And the third one is what I brought up earlier, and it's grit. Because when it comes to this high level of a contest, everyone's very close in strength, everyone's pretty equally shocked, I'm sure, about what the events are, and everyone's going in on essentially even playing field, because they're all 0.1% of the population. So there's really an undefinable difference between who wins and who takes second, unfortunately. So that term, grit, is what I use our third training goal. And the way I actually approached that training goal was through one of my personal morals in programming, which is deviate more and reap more. And that's a simple like stress adaptation concept. Like the harder you can essentially push yourself and survive, the more you can theoretically get out of it. So what I did was I used methods like cluster sets, repeatability sets. So like the ability to produce high amounts of force in, like, let's say, a triple. Even though it's at 83%, he only has 60 seconds rest, and he's performing 10 sets. So something to that effect when I say repeatability. And then when I say grit, I mean, like I said, long movement prep sets. They say where they were really taxing, and he's doing close to 1,000 feet of empty crowd pushes, like 30 or so unilateral movements on his leg by the end of the movement prep world. So that specifically is something I wanted to train, the ability to produce a similar motor pattern, like I said, with a amount of force, recover aerobically, and do it for a long time. So I think Nick will attest when he goes over his view of the program, that one set of movement prep, and any athletes know it takes about 10 minutes at least, and that's really one bout. Taxing single bouts of exercise. So essentially, I would have Nick work up to one contest standard lift, but it wasn't the contest event. So, for example, we highlighted a truck pull session we did, where it was one extreme bout of 80 feet, rest 15 seconds, 80 feet, rest 15 seconds, 80 feet. And Nick, I believe, used a 500-pound tire on turf for this. So you can imagine the friction on that. So that's what I mean by taxing single bouts of exercise with contest standards. And then lastly, it was monotony. I trained grit through monotony because from week 4 to 7, Nick had almost the exact same protocols, but they were just changed ever so slightly to move him in the direction I wanted. So, a few specifics I wanted to point out on that were the cluster sets he did on deadlift on week 5, I believe. Just give me 1 second to verify that. So week 6, actually. He had one heavy single that was auto-regulated to be at least 700, but no more than 745. And then 3 sets of 1 rep, rest 15 seconds, 1 rep, rest 15 seconds, 1 rep. And he increased each set from 675 all the way to 695. So Nick, I believe, finished his program, or in the contest, he just missed 850, pulled 850. We never went above, I believe he pulled 735 on that day. So that is a testament to the amount of stress he was under. Just his training split alone for the week. It was day 1 of training, which was an aerobic movement prep that involved no running, just to save his shins and his lower leg. GHR to potentiate his deadlift, and then eccentric GHRs to further work after. That was followed by 1 day of rest, and then 3 days of event training in a row, in which he did that unilateral flight club for 1 set totaling 1,200 feet, just 1 bout though, twice, and the movement prep I mentioned earlier once. And he progressed from that unilateral jump I talked about earlier to a depth jump on his final week. Essentially, the setup for each of those 3 days was movement prep and alactic capacity movement start. So on 2 days he jumped, and on 1 day he threw. Essentially, he had 2 or 3 events, and it was broken up into either 1 single bout of exercise and 2 clusters, or 2 single bouts of exercise and 1 working straight set. So Nick is now going to go over what it was like to go through all that peaking aspect as an athlete. And keep in mind, I did save the last week. We're going to go over his final week of training by itself. After he reviews.
Before you bring Nick in, can I ask a question in regard to that? And it's actually very specific. It's very specific to a guest I just had who talked very briefly off recording about some neurological issues. Do you find any issue with that level of movement prep, which you could say is code for essentially for warm up? You know, I realize it's far more complex and far more intricate than that, but in general, it's a systemic warm up to do all these good things under the hood to get ready for whatever the true loading protocol is. Do you find any problem with that level of warm-up and then transitioning immediately into a plyometric-based? Do you find any neurological downregulation or upregulation, or are you in fact counting on that? Is that part of the protocol?
So I'm going to answer your question in two different ways. So the way I see movement prep at this stage of the game, meaning this final phases of training, Nick's really good at it at this point. And the neurologically taxing portion of it, I've found by going through it, is largely behavioral. Although there might be some downregulation as far as maximum force production in the plyometric, it is not enough at this stage of the game at least to actually tax that plyometric. So when I implement this movement prep, it is typically not followed by a legitimate plyometric for at least 12 weeks. Okay. So that allows for sufficient time for him to neurologically adapt. Although I will admit there is probably some downregulation, but it is not enough to not get an adaptation properly out of the plyometric. And also for that reason, he has that other movement prep that I mentioned that was no running or any type of movement of that sort, still aerobic. I program it differently. It's actually meant to potentiate his plyometrics and throws. So there's really only 2 days out of the training week that I would say where his movement prep could potentially inhibit his plyometrics. Because the other two, the way I program them, they're actually potentiating the plyometric. So that is kind of how I balance it. And as we talked before, there's nothing wrong with doing some work under fatigue. So I don't exactly mind Nick doing a slightly downregulated plyometric twice a week, just because I know he's in good enough shape, and B, as he's going to talk about, we went over a very large behavioral aspect of his arousal curve and how to protect that, and that I feel was the behavioral end helping him do the plyometrics better after the long taxing movement.
Interesting. I knew without even beginning to ask, I knew that you had already considered the concept and had something in play that wasn't coming across, to me, much less probably to the listener. So I just felt I needed to play the devil's advocate there and coax that out. So I appreciate that.
Oh no, of course, it's my pleasure. You know I'm with this question.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I'm not nearly knowledgeable enough on that transmutative type stuff, transitioning from one thing to another, and so I'm really desperate to get the skinny from the true insiders like yourself. So I'm really probably asking more about it than is necessary for the context of this talk, but it's really interesting to me. So I apologize by way of I'm not really sorry.
Just to give you a little teaser, if you understand the AMP pathway and how it leads to ATP production ultimately down the line, if you look at it through the right lens, there's really 2 different mechanisms that can increase ATP production. And I'm just going to cut it there, and I'll bring that to another podcast for another time.
Absolutely. Okay, so on with Nick's impression of this hideous adventure you put him through.
Oh, it was incredible. Yeah, we explored through shits for a whole other beast. I knew the events, and it was game time. So the biggest thing was just learning the arousal curve. Essentially, what I would do is with the deadlift. So say on the deadlift day with the GHR, and then I would do some correctives, and then I would do a little bit of activation, and then I would hit a big lift, and then I would bring it back every time. So I had 20 seconds between each set with the 10 sets of 1, and it was a big shocker to really just kind of be able to do that many reps at that high of volume, and just it was.
Now, what intensity is that? You're doing 10 sets of singles with literally essentially no rest between them. I mean, us out of shape powerlifters literally take 20 seconds between reps in a set of 3. So you're essentially doing these with no rest. At what intensity is this bar loaded?
I'm not sure what the percentage is, but it was 680, so it was pretty heavy. My nervous system at that point was shot too, so it was tough.
I just want to interject quickly. I want to say Nick's ability to, I saw the videos from the session, and Nick's ability to reproduce force at that load with such little rest, I think he'll talk about as a direct effect from the movement prior.
From the glycotic sensitivity of that style of training previously, is that what you mean?
Yeah, from the medley where we, the one that didn't involve the running, it was a multiple, it was a few exercises, it was boom, 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 rest, boom, 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 rest, and one of them actually, it ended with the two reps of a thruster with 60-pound kettlebells in each arm. That was kind of like the finisher, the big power move, and I feel like that being like the last exercise, that really helped translate a lot of force through time, so it felt good. It was awesome.
Must really just have a genetic and then purely training enhanced potential to just be ridiculously glycotic, because I can't fathom that workload in that structure.
Yeah, I mean, we had, like, on one of my days, I had 4 sets of 80 feet on a duck walk, and just to get that duck walk, I mean, strong arm with this stuff, especially training by yourself. I'm going from I'm not training with Andy anymore. I mean, it was a big team I had at school, and training was incredible with all those people. Then you go to training by yourself and setting up all the equipment by yourself, and that's honestly some of the biggest battles. You're hitting multiple events in one day. I'm hitting, the duck walk, circus dumbbell, and wheelbarrow all in one day. You gotta set that up by yourself. So taking that down, it's tough. There's a lot of volume.
What's the what roughly is your total time frame from the beginning of movement prep to the final wrap up? What's the total training time per session?
Probably about 3 hours, honestly. It was getting pretty crazy. And it was the clusters that was really some of my favorite, like especially on the tire flip. For the clusters I had, it was like 3 reps, rest 10 seconds, 1 rep, rest, 1 rep for multiple sets. But the cluster sets is really where it gave me that, like, boom, 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 freak out, all right, bring it back, recoup for a few seconds, get your mind right, figure out what you need to do. But honestly, at that point, it turned into just straight skill work. It was all about just being specific and learning that skill. So when it comes down to something so specific, it's little minor changes that you just have to keep your head right, in between the reps. So that's why I like the clusters. It's boom, you hit something really heavy, boom, it messes you up. It's like, all right, what can I do within these next few seconds that I could improve for the next rep? It's like, all right, this is what I need to do. Boom, hit it. All right, that rep just went a little bit better. Now I have a few more seconds to think about that, and then I get to do another rep. So it's like, okay, what did I like on that? What didn't I like? And it becomes like every rep is just like almost an experiment, and it's just like that's when you're truly just building your craft, and that's when it really turns into strong. And clusters are incredible. They were some of my favorite part of the whole thing.
So not just to reword in slightly different language for the listeners, you're not only training the physical aspect of being strong enough, fit enough, and what have you to turn this tire or do this deadlift, but you're also training yourself psychologically and emotionally to autocorrect within that incredibly small rest period. So while you're physiologically recovering, you're psychologically preparing for the next bout.
Exactly. It's pretty much just a game of adapting. You just have to adapt to. There's always going to be a weight. There's always going to be something that's going to take you down, and with that, you get to find your weaknesses. You get to find out what the main thing is. Okay, this is the first step in the course of like corrective action, and yeah, every rep just becomes you just kind of file it down.
Right, but to be able to compact all of that into a 15-second rest period, the analytical thinking, critical thinking, and problem solving that needs to take place in 15 seconds, is truly something I would assume you have to practice. That has to be a developed skill.
That's what had an incredible translation to my competition day. Is it literally just felt like another day of training, and I just felt ready for it. It literally that's what competition is. You have no time to think about it. You just have to do it, and if you can end up mimicking it, the training literally just mimics competition day so well. It was incredible.
That's interesting. That's a considerably different way to think of it. I think most people's contest prep is purely targeted toward the physiological ability to do something with very little predication on that emotional, psychological component, which I think is probably the missing piece for almost everyone. So I'm beginning to see just how clever and devious your cohort is there.
Yeah.
And you transitioned us so well into the last thing I wanted to talk about. So, the final week of training, in every peaking cycle I've ever developed, I view the final week of training as its own mesocycle. Because your final week of training is truly almost nothing more at this point than behavioral. As a coach and as in respect to physiology, the last week's training I'm really just tailoring and fine-tuning the final adaptation I wanted to drive home. But the work's done. It's been training for 10 months. So the only profound impact that I can still leave on Nick as a coach for the final week is truly behavioral. And this is where we're going to start coming back to grit. So Nick and I are obviously in close contact, and I was able to identify where I thought he was in each event and what he needed to finish in his last week's training to give him the mental edge he needed to feel confident for each event. Because obviously each event is different, and as an athlete, each event is almost its own world. Although the 6 events might be similarly from a biomechanical standpoint when you're going out there, they feel completely different. The duck walk could feel like running 3 miles with fluorine in your lungs, and the deadlift might feel like the best time of your entire life, even though they're not entirely too different. So like I said, behavioral was my emphasis. At this point, I lightened up the movement prep for the basically only time. Everything was dropped to 60% of the original volume of movement prep, but in one bout. Just to, like I said, monotony. I didn't want Nick to lose the ability to work for 12 minutes straight without thinking. So that was the extent of his movement prep. In the last week, the last 2 weeks, including this one, his plyometrics shifted from what I see as more of a sensory base, which is how I describe his unilateral to bilateral movements, or balancing into a unilateral jump with bilateral landing, or any plyometric of that sort. Because I feel like one of the driving forces behind the adaptation that's positive for those jumps is largely sensory. The ability to produce a high amount of force, eccentrically load your hamstring, and correctly land on the same leg. That's a skill and an adaptation that every athlete should have if they're moving any sorts of weights. Now they're transitioning to more of a performance, what you would typically see in a peaking cycle as far as plyometrics. So Nick was doing a high velocity scoop toss and depth jumps for his plyometrics here. And then finally, it was mostly single bounce exercise with few exceptions. So although we did talk about Nick's one big deadlift day on day 1, prior to his 3 event days in a row, we actually did a straight bar deadlift twice, because we knew there was a max deadlift hold, and I figured the best way to drive home a max deadlift hold is with more deadlifting and making sure you're holding it. So what I guess you could say conjugate when I say he was working at a lighter percentage. For example, he was working at 475 for this day, and he had 2 sets of 3 straight bar deadlifts at 475. Mind you, he's pulling well over that. Each rep at 5-second squeeze with bare hands. So Nick had already been under a lot of fatigue, and that squeeze is just driving home that grit-based adaptation, as I was talking about, holding on out through deer light when your hands are killing you because you did tire flip beforehand, and when you're exhausted because your second day in a row of training events, you still have another day ahead of you. And then, ironically enough, as talking about behavioral adaptations, on the final day of training, for the whole training cycle, Nick came to lightning, slept over my house. And it was pretty emotional when we were training because his last 2 work sets were some of the most impressive single bouts of exercise I've seen in my life, to be honest. Nick's last truck pull was just 1 set, 80 feet, and heavy, as hard as he could. And so Matt Mills thought Nick the tire was moving a little bit too quick, and he sat on it. And Nick adapted, didn't budge. There was literally no change in slack in the line that Nick was pulling the tire on. And he fought the isometric of Matt Mills sitting on a 500-pound tire for a legitimate 12 seconds without moving. Mind you, Nick was pulling on a rope and not moving for 12 seconds straight. As hard as I can, all out, last time.
Wow.
And that led to Stones, where he had his final cluster of training. He was 1 set, 2 reps of a 280 stone at 58, 1 rep of a 300 stone at 54, 1 rep of a 330 stone at 54, and 2 reps at a 350 stone at 52. Followed by, with short rests, 1 set of 6 to 58 at 275. So, this was emotional to see, not only because of how hard Nick was truly working at this point, but Nick was actually crying during his solos, and it somehow produced one of the most beautiful solos I've ever seen. So on that note, I'm going to let Nick review his final week of training, and then I'm going to revisit Grit and ask Nick a question one last time to end the podcast.
Yeah, the last week of training was truly special, 100% unforgettable. So every session, alright, this is it. Like after all these weeks, this is my last day 1, this is my last day 2. So on everything I did, I just kind of went to failure in the end of it. I mean, by far, the ISO truck pull was the craziest thing that I've ever done. That was legitimately, it's like having a harness on your back attached to a brick wall. You're just pulling on a rope to maximal effort. And it was crazy. It tore my hands a little bit, but it definitely was emotional. It's been such a long journey between qualifying for nationals to going to nationals to making it to the Worlds, and at first I wasn't even sure if the Worlds was going to happen. So every session was just kind of like, if that was it, my last rep on everything was just everything I have. I probably don't think I could have gotten a single more rep on anything, to be completely honest. I barely even finished, and I think it was the tire flip and the dumbbell, both of those I went to a failure, and I went to a straight failure, and then once that happened, I rested a few more seconds, and then went for 1 more rep on each. And it was incredible. And I'd say for the truck pull and the harness, that really helped, considering I won that event. That was an incredible event win for me. I was kind of unsure going into it because I wasn't training with a truck. Obviously, it's not something that you can mimic in training. So I was unsure going into it. We got a few test runs. Both of my test runs didn't actually feel good at all when I was at the show, and I was kind of nervous about it with the truck. But I was like, all right, whatever. Like I know that like those two didn't work, so I kind of stuck around, and I watched another one of the competitors. Because the guys from overseas, they actually do truck pull more often than we do in America. For the amateur competitions, I've never done it. So they were more well versed, and I saw one of the guys just get a good start, and I kind of just like analyzed his mechanics, because in the end of the day, that's what all this is going to be. And I was like, okay, that's kind of what I need to do, utilize the harness a little more. And once I saw that, I got like, I was like, I'm just going to take that into my turn. I got a really good start, and then from then on, I just ran with it and won that event. And other than that, I also won the deadlift. Well, I tied for first in the deadlift. We set the junior world record with 815, me and Tom Stoltman. That was that was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I just missed 845. But other than that, I mean, I didn't even really, those were the two event wins that I had. I just kind of came in the top in the other events and just did what I needed to drive it home.
Now, to fill in for the listener, because without seeing this stuff, kind of on a whiteboard, it's a little hard to follow. You're literally, now granted you had addressed that the volume had been truncated, but you're literally training to kind of a positive plus failure point in your training. What was the rest time between your last event training session and the first day of contest? Did you have any taper in there, or was the contest just essentially another workout is what I'm getting at?
No, we did take, I think it was, how many days was it? 5. Because towards my last training sessions, I was basically stronger than I've ever been, or close to it, but feeling like garbage, like nervous system down the drain. So that's where those 5 days of, just recovering the nervous system, that's when it really tied. In the active recovery work, that's where it really tied everything in together.
You briefly mentioned active recovery work. The way I program active recovery work during his 5 days off is it's typically once or twice. It is about 80% of the movement prep that they were using in training, and typically actually 110 or more % of their plyometrics. That acts as their resistance training, and then that is actually a conclusion in their training as well. So it's purely for potentiation and enzymatic purposes, but as said previously, you can use a peak aerobic adaptation as little as 3 days, and also, as I mentioned previously, that ability to produce force and recover was my #1 training goal for Nick. So I was not about to let him lose a peak adaptation because of too much rest. In those 5 days off, Nick trained twice. So only 3 days were truly classified as rest, but that is because Nick has an incredibly high work capacity. Obviously, he felt dead, which is what I put him through. But here, 1 day of recovery for Nick, you could say feels like 2 for most, what I would call under-trained athletes. And that brings me to my final point. My third training goal for Nick was grit. And I, at the time, actually quantified it as something I think I could get him to train. Whether I was incorrect or correct in that assumption, it did affect how I molded his program and how I blended it week to week. Because that is something that those 3 goals were something I kept in mind every week when I updated Nick and when I taught. So, the last question I have is, Nick, as an athlete, do you feel that grit is something that you could actually train?
Yes, 100%. I mean, especially with the way you develop your programming and the way you set your goals. I mean, the way these training sessions were, it was so hard to do. It was either you're all in or you're all out, pretty much. Every single day tested exactly why you were there. It was a mental battle. There were so many reps. Every rep, it was a choice to be there. It was a choice to take 3 hours for a training session and sacrifice all this, and it was all a choice, and you become more and more okay with that choice over time, because when you stay steady with something and you really keep going with something, the results just happen at one point or another. And I don't know, I just had this deep down feeling that I knew everything was going to play out how it should be. So I 100% think that grit is something that is trainable.
It's funny, I've been biting my lip because I really hate to talk into, especially a 3-way conversation such as this, quite so much. But as I've mentioned to you and even to the listeners in the past, I've had an awful lot of involvement with Eastern European coaches. And one of the things I've always asked them is that much volume really necessary? I mean, I know it worked, I know you did it, but was that really necessary? and a lot of them would say, kind of under their breath with a wink and a nudge, was it absolutely necessary for the physical goal? No. Was it absolutely necessary to weed out the people that really fucking wanted to be there? Yeah. And I think in a roundabout way, you guys are both agreeing that that's the same thing, only differently applied.
Truthfully, it is. And Nick and I just kind of stumbled upon that, like, through training. Like, personally as an athlete, mental, I don't want to say commitment, but like being able to fully approach something with 100% of my focus, I always struggled with on the day of. And I personally found through my training that when I did that little extra too much volume, it gave me something like kind of unquantifiable for like my own confidence on the day. And like I said, me and Nick have trained together every day for the last, we're going on 5 years now. We haven't trained together now, but for 4 straight years, we did train together. And that's something we kind of came through together, and we kind of melded in something that we could actually program, in my opinion.
It 100% followed through in the program. I mean, competition day, I'll never forget what it felt like for the rest of my life. I felt like I couldn't have been any more ready for any event, for each and every event. I felt like I wanted it, and it felt so natural. It felt like the best training session of my life. I felt like I knew exactly what each rep was going to feel like. I somehow was able to adapt to the weird dumbbell that no one's ever used before, and adapt to all these weird things, and it couldn't have translated any better from a physical or mental standpoint.
Well, now, one thing I want to do, we kind of launched into this conversation with just, who you are and what you were training, and then really broke into these weeks and, training sessions, and something that there may be a listener, I suspect not with my listening crowd, but just to emphasize or to highlight, all of this culminated in, and you just won, and you go ahead and name the event. I mean, there may be people out there that don't realize the magnitude of what this led you to.
Yeah, it was World's Strongest Junior, so 24 and under, World's Strongest, and it was the best experience of my entire life. It really was.
So just, for those that aren't completely on board with this, there's only a couple of WSM winners, period, ever, all time. You're literally hearing the events that led up to the creation of one. It's truly a staggering thing. And then also to consider that, the person you're hearing did this is literally a junior athlete. That's even more staggering.
Yeah, 22 years old, and it's been such an incredible journey with me and Andy. And this show couldn't have played out any better. It was somewhere in Canada at my first international show, but the way the programming led me, I truly felt like I was at home with every event. When they called my name out, and with every individual event, it felt like home. It felt like just another day of practice. So we really learned a lot. I learned a lot this whole training cycle. It's been incredible.
Some just random questions I have, having heard you recount that and not being nearly as intimate with your overall training. How much of this training cycle was really the development of strength, and how much was the maintenance of strength, and then the development of all these new and interesting skills that you're bringing forward? Were you essentially any stronger at the end of the program, or were you just more refined?
Honestly, I'd say with the way everything worked out, both.
Really?
I was stronger and more. I felt like I was ready for anything. I felt like they could have thrown any event at me that day, and it wouldn't have mattered. I don't know. I just feel like everything came together.
Well, I certainly understand the idea of being perfectly primed and prepped. I mean, that is every programmer's pet fantasy. Considerably harder to do than it sounds. But my question is, like, in just the absolute abstract, from the beginning of the programming to the end, was your, say, let's just randomly pick an event, your deadlift, was it actually any higher of a figure? Was your ability to move load greater, or was just your, not just, I say just, that's an ignorant thing to say, but in a sense, was the major stimulus in terms of more of a skill and repeatability and strength fitness kind of program?
More of a skill type of thing, to be honest. I mean, it was being able to do something repetitively so perfectly, because in the end of the day, you are ready for anything, but it is incredibly specific. So that's what it becomes down to such a specific skill, just being good at unilateral movement in the overhead position. Just that's a skill that I just got better at in general. So
that's essentially what I was gathering from the explanations, but I wasn't hearing it said specifically. So there is that, when people try to emulate, their favorite pro, or they try to emulate their sports hero, there is that concept you have to keep in mind is the person you're hearing, the person that, you're talking about is wildly strong from the outset. It's not as if a program such as this is going to make you really strong. It's going to take a really strong person to make them incredibly precise. Would you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. I mean, this wasn't my first big show. This wasn't my first one. It was the biggest show ever, but it wasn't my first big training cycle. I mean, I've been training and competing for years, so just to see a little bit of an increase every year is a big deal. But this was just more than ever, this whole prep.
I think a testament to Nick's peak was we spent a lot of the year doing our controlled tempo work and very monotonous lifts. So, deadlifting twice a week, pressing twice a week, accessory movements, and just driving home consistently perfect reps with a high amount of volume at a moderate intensity each week. Prior to this last 7-week phase, I think the heaviest Nick went is foundational mesocycle was probably around 635, and not much volume there. There was probably a lot in the 550 to 600 range, and by a lot I mean 30 reps session twice a week.
Well, as you and I both know, it's repetitive work with moderate volume that generates the adaptive responses. Exposure to 80, 90, and 100% are valuable and necessary for peaking, but they're not valuable and necessary for hypertrophy and all the other secondary characteristics.
Absolutely. Strongman really is a game of taking what you want to put your coins into and running with it. Because a lot of max strength won't get you too far, unfortunately.
Yeah, especially in the condition of modern strongman, where it's really almost fitness first. The way the events are being designed these days. And I say that with all due difference. I say that with no disrespect, because the guys that are doing it are retardedly strong. Mr. Hadge is a wonderful example thereof. But I am saying that strongman over the last 30 years has mutated far more toward the fitness side than the strength side.
It has, between the medleys, random pairings of overhead medleys, deadlift medleys, and reps in a minute. And then just max events. I mean, my duck walk was just max duck walk. It was the very first event 1, day 1. It was
that was kind of nasty. That put you in a big hip hamstring hole right to start the day. That's no fun.
Yeah, it was by far the most, out of all 8 events, the duck walk was the absolute worst. It was max distance, and by the end of it, I just felt like I wanted to die. And then after that was dumbbell, and then after that was deadlift. So day 1 was a lot of fun.
That's very cool.
Now
I have some just questions that when you were programming this overall, obviously you had a mental template of what you thought it was going to look like, and the number of weeks, and you had probably an outline for the rough volumes. But my question is, how much, I don't know what the word is, I don't want to say auto-regulation because it wouldn't be auto, but how much week-to-week modulation did you actually do to the plan based on feedback from one another? How much, basically I'm asking is, how much tinkering was there on the fly?
Honestly, almost none.
That's what I thought you were going to say. I really thought that's what you were going to say. And it makes me mad, because that kind of relationship where you know someone so well that you could know exactly what's going to be happening at 4 p.m. 5 weeks from now is really something to be envious of. It's not fair.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's funny you say that. Nick and I always reveled in the fact that whenever we partake in a program together, it's so cool to be able to pick a day on the calendar that you want to be the strongest you've ever been for a specific event, and you just have it.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. Did you have any trouble with injuries along the way? Did you have to, adjust anything for, make allowances for injury, or did this really go that smoothly?
I mean, it's crazy you can say, but there were 0 injuries. It actually did go that smoothly.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, it honestly couldn't have gone any better in any aspects.
Well, that's what that's what the good coaches are paid for. I'm proud to say I know one.
Thank you.
That's ridiculous. Well, that's probably one of the biggest characteristics in successful strongman is just people. Really the top champions have a huge resistance to injury. I know that they always want to chalk it up to, I'm really clever and my programming is really good, but I think at the end of the day, it's one of those, like bodybuilder A, B, and C is, your narrow waist isn't really because of your great training. It's because you were born with a fucking narrow waist. And I think there's a lot of that in strongman is the guys that are really successful just for a quirk of genetics are just really tough fuckers. They're just tough and resistant to injury. And then they can pull off these ridiculous training programs like you laid out. Is that fair, you think?
100%. And honestly, all those numerous reps and all the movement reps, all that volume is what kept me injury free. If you can handle that much volume, it's doing it the right way, doing all the tedious. It's so tedious. It's stuff that oftentimes people look over and people don't do, and that's what leads to injury. But
I agree.
It's that mental, that tedious, that movement. It's my movement prep is like the warm up would take 45 minutes almost, and it would just. No one's gonna do that. It's weird moves that people are looking at me doing the quarter squats or the 4-inch squats, which is one of my favorite ones. It's tedious, and being able to actually accumulate so much volume and so much work is what's going to actually keep you injury free. So that's what was my huge foundation. That's what really helps me. The movement prep was probably the most important component, I'd say.
I suspect you're right, and knowing Mr. Triana and his excruciating detail to that particular subject, I'm certain that you're right. It's fascinating though to hear. I don't know how to word this because I really never ever mean to be disrespectful, but oftentimes athletes such as yourself, that especially ones that have been so successful, tend to, I don't want to say take undue credit because you won, it's always your credit. But I find it exciting, interesting, and gratifying to find someone like yourself that is so comfortable acknowledging that an enormous amount of your success was actually because of someone else's clever, programming and involvement. I really find that worthy of much more respect than I think most people give it.
Oh, I mean, I couldn't have done it without Andy. Really, he's my best friend and training partner. Yeah, that's what we did in college. All 4 years, everybody was else doing another sport or doing whatever they did, and we were going to bed early on Friday nights and smashing training Saturday mornings and everything else in between. So I couldn't have done this without him in any sense.
That's extraordinary. It's great to see a team so well meshed. That's good stuff. That really is. It's really and I do this show month after month. Every 2 weeks I do a show, and I just don't hear enough of that. I don't hear enough people. The whole idea, my idea of this digital age and all these cool and clever and I think wildly underutilized tools, the internet and Facebook and all these things where we can communicate, and yet I don't find any meaningful communication going on. And then it's so refreshing to just talk to the two of you and hear that you talk and you communicate and you've developed this extraordinary rapport with just communication. just paying attention and talking. And how do you feel? How do you look? What's going on? Make a few notes, and next thing you know, you got a fucking world champion on your hands. I mean, granted, it's not as easy as that, but yet it kind of is.
Yeah, I mean, truly, I tell a lot of clients, all my clients actually, your relationship with your coach is the limiting factor in your success. I could have written Nick the greatest program I've ever written 3 times over, but I truly don't think if we didn't have the relationship we had, it just wouldn't have run as smoothly. And I honestly don't think he would have been able to do on paper what I wrote if we didn't have the relationship we have. Like, there's so much trust between us. Like, I trusted that he would do things the way I put them on the paper so that he would be safe. And he trusted me that, like, no matter what happens, he'd be safe too. And training together on Saturdays, like, throughout the program, like, really was the undefined edge that I think gave Nick in the day of was he had his coach there that was able to, like, actually help him. And I think that really makes the difference.
I have to agree that can't be a coincidence that, you know, you're that well familiarized with one another and have that level of trust, because with any relationship, you know, husband and wife, husband and husband, whatever you got going on, the secret of making any dynamic work is ultimately trust. It just really is. I know that sounds like corny, you know, self-help stuff, but it's not. It's just the way the universe works.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's just, me and him are just the perfect example, but it goes on at any level for client and coach. You just have that blind faith. And just, because, I mean, so many times, so many people, if Andy gave that same exact protocol to other people that he wasn't close with, they would probably skip half of it, you know? But if you actually have the blind faith where it's like, okay, I wholeheartedly, I truly believe that whatever he gives me, I'm going to do it exactly, and it's going to work. No deviation. It's just blind faith, and that's important between every coach and athlete.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you probably the question you probably looked at each other and asked, what's next? I mean, you've been hammering this for almost a year now, nonstop. Obviously, there's going to be a break somewhere. And then, you know, what's the future of competitive strongman hold for you? And then I guess the question turns over and asks, what the hell's the programming for that going to look like?
So, as athletes, me and Nick are still in love with what we're doing, and we're certainly not going to stop. We're going to keep pushing ourselves to higher heights, compete at bigger shows, better performances, more professional, just really trying to push the bill as how you should model yourself as an athlete as well. Like, we try to pride ourselves in being good people that are friendly and that create good energy at contests, and we both truly feel that that's part of our success as well, that we find friends in the sport and we try to build each other up, and that's what makes everybody better. That's how you truly have a good time in a strongman show. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, within the next few months, I think there's going to be a lot more publicized about me and Nick. We're going to be going into our first steps of business together, and I'll leave it at that. But
wow, very exciting. And that brings me to a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. One of my upcoming podcasts, hopefully, will be on the business of strength sports. So perhaps I'll be hitting you up for some input in that discussion.
Absolutely. I mean, I always enjoy my time on the podcast.
Do you have any specific events lined up for the future, or are we going to see any,
Nick and I are actually competing together at the Partners competition in Lightning Fitness in December. So we're going to be competing as heavyweights, doing a tandem log, which is going to be hilarious. But we're really just going to hop in and have fun. And then I'll be competing in January at a local contest to earn my qualification to return to USS Nationals.
Okay. Are we going to see him on any pro events in the future, or?
We'll see. I mean, technically, I haven't earned my pro card through this show, and it's all strong as the whole pro thing with the federation. it's a lot. In the end of the day, I just want to compete internationally. I want to be around guys that are better than me, and I want to compete at a higher level. So, as of right now, I'm taking the time to establish a huge foundational base, a lot of like generalized programming, extremely advanced generalized programming. But I'm going to take a few months off, and then I'm going to pick something big, and I'm not even exactly sure what that's going to be. I just want to keep traveling to new levels.
Fair enough. That's certainly your purview, and God knows you deserve it and earned it at this point. So yeah, you can compete wherever the hell you like, my friend.
Thank you very much.
I have to say though, with the speed of your incline and the pinnacle you've reached in such a short time, I wouldn't think that a Giants show or something like that is outside of your abilities by any stretch.
Yeah, no, I really hope to be a good heavyweight contender within the next few years, so we'll see where that takes me. I mean, every day I'm excited about the programming and where it's going to turn to next, and somehow with Andy, it's always going to be something new, always going to be something fresh and different, so I'm just loving every step of the way.
Well, Mr. Programming Wizard, do you have anything to add to that?
I just want to drive home that, like, Grit wins championships. Like, me and Nick did a lot of other fancy stuff behind the scenes, a lot of science on my end. But, anyone can do that. Like, anyone can read a book and understand how to manipulate physiology, and anyone can, read a book and understand how to program and peak someone.
Did you just insult me?
No, not at all, brother.
I couldn't help it. I couldn't resist that. I'm sorry.
But, it's really truthfully like that undefined ability to make things happen in your way, no matter what. So don't be afraid to train hard, because that's where we found it.
That's good stuff. I agree with everything you said. I'm fascinated by a lot of it. I have to say with a straight face, a lot of that programming is not the way I would have envisioned it, but now that you lay it out, it's obvious and makes perfect sense. It obviously worked very well, and again, kind of the big take home is very often the toughest bastard wins, and very often being the toughest bastard is a trait that you can develop. Pretty sure that's what Mr. Triana's trying to highlight there, is that just like getting bigger, getting stronger, getting faster, you can get meaner. You can get meaner along the way, and meaner is useful in a realm like this.
Without a doubt.
That is good stuff. All right, gentlemen. Real quick, is there anything you want to say to the listeners, to the fans, maybe the potential clients? Any way to get a hold of you? Any way to get more programming wizardry?
Feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram. I don't have Twitter. I'm not the best, I'll be honest, with Facebook and Instagram, but I will get to you. So just feel free to reach out, and feel free to reach out to Nick as well. He can tell you where to reach out, but...
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I have a joint Instagram with my brother. It's Hadge, Hadge _brothers. And, he's a light and heavyweight pro stronger, and we kind of just post our training videos, and he also does programming from Andy, so me and him are always throwing up some of the crazy stuff that Andy has us doing, so...
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up this whirlwind episode of Sports Performance Radio. I hope to have both of you back. I hope to be able to report more successes and more excitement, and I hope to come back to this business venture at some point in the future. But until then, listeners, this is B.Chavez, Sports Performance Radio. Until next month, stay strong.